My name is Leia, and I will be reading an excerpt from Narayan Liu's novella, The Masks of Monsters, for the Buzz Bookstore Excerpt Contest. The moon had barely emerged before Aaron entered the keeper's war room. He was keen and felt more impatient than he ever had been. Every minute he spent waiting and pacing the round chamber was filled with a fantasy he could not shake. He saw a few in power instead of just one. He thought back to the High Lords of the past, those who built palaces and chose to build a world where vampires could be more than cursed creatures. Under Rudolph's rule they had become gods of the grotesque and could never rise to anything more. The thick door creaked open and in entered Esmeralda, humbly stepping toward him and shutting the door tightly behind her. She stood there for a moment, staring at the mystical being before her, eyes holding fascination aplenty and a smile that spoke of curiosity and awe. But these were not the features that drew his eyes towards her. It was her flesh, the mortal blood within her, warm and sweet. He could imagine it tasting like a first kiss. "The keeper will be here shortly," she said concisely. He raised a brow and crossed his thick arms, grunting with impatience. "He sent you merely to tell me that?" he scoffed. She made her way across the room, seemingly gliding along the cold stone floor until she was but inches away from him. Her hand left her side and hovered beside his shoulder, desperately wanting to touch his flesh, almost as though out of disbelief that such a creature could exist. Yet here he was, an immortal being, a monster so many children were frightened of, a monster so many tried to dismiss as fairy tale and myths. The vampire. "How long have you been this way?" she asked in a stutter. 400 years, he answered quickly. "Was it difficult learning how to fly?" she asked. As she did, her hand gently slid down the length of his leathery wing, and it flinched as though it was fearful of her mortal touch, and it prompted her to back away quite quickly. The look of fear upon her face sent a rush of pleasure into his grey face. He chuckled, looking into her frightened amber eyes with a bright glow in his. "Does my fear bring you joy?" she stuttered, giving all the strength her heart held into feigning bravery. It only served to amuse him further. He nodded, proudly telling her that her words held truth. "Yes, it does, my child. Do not look so shocked, for it shall soon become your addiction too. To see fear in the eyes of your prey as he lies shaking with his hands, glistening with sweat, in front of him. But he stares at you, knowing that there is nothing left between us to protect him from me. His tears, the begging, the shaking, the look of despair. A humble surrender to his fate," he said, stepping toward her with many a violent step. His eyes were wide, and for a moment as she stood backed against a dry and jagged wall, halfway into crouching in fear, she believed this to be the end, the final moments of mortal life before she was either taken into darkness or death. He stopped. He laughed. He turned away and returned to the table, giving her one sideway glance, scoffing at the possibility of her becoming a vampire. "Gliding over the world is easy, girl. Drawing blood from a mortal is easy. Worry more about becoming one with these creatures, living with them, loving them, and knowing in your heart that they," he said, his hand jutted toward the door, pointing toward the world on the other side, "they are all monsters."